First is just a simple question. How many people die in Ohio each year as a result of power plant emissions?
Representative Foster, thanks for the question. I don't know the exact number to your question, but my premise—
Roughly, factor of two.
I don't know. I'm not a physician. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's sort of surprising because that seems like a fundamental question here. Let's see, I actually do have an estimate, if we could have the thing here. This is an estimate from someone by the Clean Air Task Force, put this together based, I think it's primarily driven by particulate emissions. And it looks like you sort of do an eyeball average, about 10 people in 10,000, 10 in 100,000, about 1 in 10,000 die each year in Ohio, roughly in a typical area of Ohio. If this data is correct. And Ohio, I think, has something like 10 million people. So we're talking 1,000-ish, roughly 1,000 people per year die because of particulates from coal plants. So I was wondering, from a purely economic point of view that you advocate, what is the economically optimum number of people to die in Ohio each year?
Yeah, Representative Foster, so Ohio is about 11.5 million people. And ultimately, I think the chart that you're showing and the argument that you're making is around something that Dr. Shaw talked about, this issue about these co-benefits of the Clean Power Plan. I mean, you're talking about this is about issues around particulate emissions, has nothing to do with CO2 emissions under the Clean Power Plan.
Right, but this hearing is about closing coal plants.
This
right?
hearing is about
closing. The title of the hearing is closing plants. Right, right. So the co-benefits. I do not understand the argument that when you complain about the costs of something, you don't include the economic co-benefits. But that's a separate issue. So, but I was wondering, just in general, you know, if you, for whatever philosophical approach to this you take, how would you calculate the economically optimum number of people to die in Ohio each year? What are the inputs into that?
Sure, Representative Foster, we care about all 11.5 million Ohioans, and this hearing today is about the Clean Power Plan. It is about the CO2 emissions that are supposed to be reduced from the Clean Power Plan. We take seriously, and as you have seen in my remarks also, that Ohio has reduced its not only CO2 emissions, but we've reduced our sulfur dioxide and our particulate emissions.
How do you do the optimum plan? In your point of view, do you believe that the optimum number of people to die from particulates in Ohio is 0 or some number bigger than 0? And how, from your philosophical point of view, do you calculate the optimum number of people to die each year?
Sure, Representative Foster. So we've benefited from an all-fuels approach in the state of Ohio. So not only do we have coal plants, we've got hydroelectric plants, we've got energy efficiency, we've got natural gas, we've got wind, we've got solar. We think that it is in our best economic and environmental interest to have all of those in Ohio, and we'll strive to continue to do that.
But ultimately, you have a philosophy that tells you how to optimize that mix for well, maybe purely economic or a combination of purely economic and environmental aspects. That allows you to calculate the number of people who should die in Ohio each year. How would you advocate determining that number? Yeah, for example, does it include the health effects in the downwind states? If emissions from Ohio kill people in downwind states, should that be included or not? If the emissions from Ohio raise CO2, we lose the Greenland ice sheet, and 75 years from now, people die in coastal areas. Should that be included or not? How large is your commons that you're looking at here?
Representative Foster. So the way that we look at this in Ohio is that, again, it's an all-fuels approach, and whether or not you want to, and what we don't account for is the notion in the Clean Power Plan is that we'll see any impact to human health because of emissions that are regulated under the Clean Power Plan. We take into development of our plan not just clean power, but how we look at our energy mix based on an economic model. It is also based on looking at environmental protection, is included in my role as director of being protective of human health and the environment. So it's always a balance on how we try to balance those perspectives. We work closely with the Public Utilities Commission, all of our utilities, to try to set up what that appropriate mix
what I'm fishing for is what is the balance of human suffering and death versus economic goals? Because it seems like there's a big disconnect, and we're talking past each other
Sure.
on this. Where one side of this hearing room, people seem to be ignoring anything regarding to quality of life or ultimately death, and versus purely economic concerns. I was just wondering how you handle that, and what is the objective function you're optimizing for from a mathematical point of view? Does it take into account the number of deaths in Ohio, or not?
Well, Representative, I just tell you, I think your line of questioning is really unfair from the perspective of what this hearing is about. It's about the Clean Power Plan. It's about looking at CO2 emissions relative to the Clean Power Plan. We have addressed.
The title of the hearing is that the power plant will shut down power plants. We're talking about shutting down certain kinds of plants. Anyway,
Gentleman's time.